Often titled the father of comedy, Aristophanes is the oldest surviving comedic playwright. As profound as vulgar, his plays reveal ancient Athenian values, ideology, and controversies. Jeering at and referencing sex, gender, religion, politicians, history, other playwrights, and morality, he is now, perhaps, even more irreverent and funny than ever before. Aristophanes' plays, Clouds. A jocular scene is played out as Strepsiades counts and tallies his debts. In the meanwhile, his son, Pheidippides, speaks in his sleep about horse racing. The father complains that his son is lazy and only thinks about sport and gambling. In fact, he blames his son for all his debts. Therefore, he comes up with a solution to his money problems. He wakes up his son and says the following to him.
That's the think shop for the brilliant. Inside are clever people who can prove to you that the sky is the lid of a broiler, that it envelopes us, and that we are the charcoal.
Who are these people?
I don't exactly know, but they are deep ruminating brainiacs, the best kind of people.
Yuck, I know them. Boy, are they poison. You're talking of a bunch of frauds. That barefoot dough-faced lot like that pitiful Socrates, and that Chaerephon.
Since I hope you already know a bit about Socrates, let me only explain that Chaerephon was the man who famously asked the oracle of Delphi, who is the smartest man in the world, to which the oracle allegedly answered Socrates. The father's plan is for his son to enter the so-called think shop and learn about goodness and badness. He is especially interested in badness. He believes that this will allow him to make the false and weaker argument appear true and stronger. That is how the father hopes to avoid paying debts. However, his son, Pheidippides, does not want to learn and says,
Well, my Uncle Megacles won't see me go horseless. I'm off. And as for you, I don't give a damn.
This, in my opinion, foreshadows the only unquestionable principal moral assertion of the play. It is not the only play in which Aristophanes makes a big deal about what ought to be the rightful demeanor of children towards their parents, but more on that later. Strepsiades, the father, decides to go to the think shop himself. He is greeted by a student and the following most memorable joke ensues.
All right, I'll tell you, but you've got to realize this is holy stuff, most secretive. Socrates has just been asking Chaerephon on how many of its own feet can a flea jump. You see, a flea just bit Chaerephon's eyebrow, and then it jumped onto Socrates' soup.
And Socrates is measuring the terrain?
Yes, he melted some wax, took the flea, and dipped its feet in it, so when the wax cooled, the flea had fancy Persian slippers on. These he removed to measure the distance.
Lord above, what subtlety!
Like to hear another brilliant idea of Socrates?
The previous joke should not be overlooked. It is open to many interpretations and possibly reveals much about humanity. The jokes continue as the pupil describes how Socrates came up with a theory that explains how mosquitoes make their noises.
He was scrutinizing the byways of the moon, gazing upwards in the dark with his mouth open when, from the ceiling, a gecko shat on him.
Oh, I like that. A gecko shitting on Socrates.
Lastly, their poverty and hunger are mentioned. Then a bunch of students in contorted positions are revealed. Jocularly, it is in such discomfort that they are supposed to make their investigations. Then the students are brought indoors, out of the stage, because they are humorously not allowed to spend too much time outdoors. Then several objects, maps, and instruments are presented. This part is, I imagine, akin to a modern-day comedian using comedy tools. In one of the jokes, Strepsiades is shown a map of the known world. This was then a rare object. The ignorant father complains that Sparta is too close to Athens, LOL. Socrates finally makes an appearance, and I simply have to quote the passage.
Oh, Socrates, my own little Socrapet.
Ephemeral thing. Why do you address me?
Well, for a start, do tell me what you're doing.
I tread the air and scrutinize the sun.
Looking down into a basket? Why not look up? You will never find the gods looking in there.
To glean accurate knowledge of the heavens, I have to suspend thought and meld my cerebral vibrations with the homogeneous air. If I'd been down here and looked up there, I wouldn't have discovered a thing. The earth, you see, is forced to attract the moisture of thought. Watercress does the same.
You don't say. The mind draws moisture into watercress? O Socrates, do come down to me at once and teach me all I've come to learn.
Strepsiades goes on to beg Socrates to teach him the bad argument, and he promises by the gods that he will pay him if necessary. Socrates responds by pointing out that there are no gods, that him and his disciples do not believe in the gods, except for the clouds. The philosopher then performs a religious-like ritual of introduction to the school in which he chants and throws a handful of flour on Strepsiades. From the enchantment the chorus appears. It is composed of female clouds. Several jokes are made about these clouds. They are eulogized as patrons to the wise, intelligent, and creative. Most memorable is when Strepsiades asks why they look like women. Socrates explains that the appearance of a cloud is in the eye of the beholder. After the clouds deliver a speech whose verbosity and fluidity astounds Strepsiades, Socrates responds,
Naturally, these are the only genuine goddesses. The rest are frauds.
This is perhaps the second theme of the play, the impiety natural to philosophers. That is not to say that Aristophanes is particularly pious, but that is better attested in another play. Strepsiades wishes for Socrates to elaborate on this last point, and the eternal renowned discussion on how spin is superior to Zeus ensues. Socrates says that Zeus does not cause rain or thunder. A merit-worthy explanation for these events is provided, meaning Aristophanes does actually relate some natural philosophy. Let me quote to exemplify my meaning. Rhetorically, the philosopher asks,
Have you ever seen rain without clouds? Otherwise, Zeus would have to produce the rain himself when the clouds are not at home.
Regarding the motion of clouds, Socrates claims centrifugal pressure, to which Strepsiades hilariously enough replies,
Centrifugal pressure? I never thought of that. So, it's no more Zeus. Centrifugal pressure reigns.
As for thunder and lightning, Socrates says,
Learn from your own experience. Have you ever filled your tummy with soup at the Panathenaic festival, then felt a sudden rumble and upheaval?
When Strepsiades says that lightning is directed intentionally, that Zeus strikes immoral perjurers, Socrates replies, among other things, and may I, your narrator, be struck by thunder if this is not an honest piece of philosophy.
The oak tree is hardly a perjurer.
It is hard to imagine how this would have been received at the time. One thing is clear, Greek religion was not like most modern-day religions. Just look no further than the Iliad and the Odyssey. These seem to be openly metaphorical and allegorical. They are not like the Bible, which pretends to be a work of history. Strepsiades expresses his conversion and says he will no longer make any offerings or pour libations or pour incense to the fake gods. He asks the clouds to make him the best speaker in all of Greece, explicitly and solely so that he may
Screw up the law to suit myself and give my creditors the slip.
The clouds promise him that they will help him. Socrates begins his education with a clever analogy.
Come along now, describe for me your main features. Only by knowing you can I begin to plan a campaign.
I can't help imagining that this is not an original catchphrase by Aristophanes. It must have been a common refrain. Either way, this initiates a jocular interchange in which Strepsiades misinterprets all of Socrates' metaphors and insinuations. For example,
Well, now, when I toss you a juicy piece of cosmology, bite it off the air.
So, I'm going to gulp down knowledge like a dog?
The man's a barbarian, a complete clot.
subsequently, the chorus sings the parabasis in which, as usual, Aristophanes praises himself and argues that he should win first prize. When acting resumes, Socrates scolds Strepsiades. The philosopher says that he is useless, fruitless, and a hopeless student. A series of jokes occurs wherein Strepsiades once again misinterprets all of Socrates' questions. The philosopher is asking about things that would no longer be qualified as part of philosophy. He asks about what we would now qualify as the elements of music, at least classical music. The jokes are lost to me as I do not know anything about this. Thus, it is hard to laugh at Strepsiades' incompetence and ignorance. After Strepsiades complains that all he wishes to learn is badness, Socrates replies,
But there are lots of other things you ought to know. Which of the quadrupeds, for instance, are unconditionally male?
Strepsiades tries to demonstrate that he already knows such things and ends up naming chicken as male. Socrates points out that he is making the mistake of using the same word for cock and hen. Strepsiades is astounded by the revelation, and Socrates explains that he should use the terms cock and coquette. This in turn leads to a pun about Cleonymus, the stereotypical homosexual that Aristophanes always makes fun of because of his flamboyance. Socrates instructs him to lay in bed and research or meditate. He is uncomfortable because of the bedbugs, but when Socrates returns, Strepsiades shares some of his ideas or revelations. These include hiring a sorceress to stop the travel of the moon as his loans are due after the next new moon. Also using a prism or crystal to burn the record of his loans. Socrates commends all of this and more until the debtor suggests hanging himself as a way to avoid paying his debts. Socrates does not like this idea and replies,
You're driveling. Make yourself scarce. I'm not going to teach you anymore.
As a result, the clouds tell Strepsiades to send his son in his place, and he agrees to try that again. A curious remark is made revealing that the clouds are planning to betray or correct Strepsiades. The chorus says to Socrates,
You realize that very soon it's going to pay off? Leave it to us goddesses to see to that. Here is a man who's ready to grant you every boon. See how impressionable he is, struck by the moon. So, get a move on to make your money. This kind of luck always ends too soon.
Strepsiades argues to his son, Pheidippides, a youth, that the gods are not real. He says that the true cause of Zeus' supposed powers is spin. Let me quote a section of the exchange.
Spin. Spin has given Zeus the push.
Man, you're drooling.
Believe me, it's true.
Who says so?
Socrates of Melos and Caraphon, the expert on fleas' toes.
You believe ninnies like that? You're off your rocker.
Watch your mouth, and don't you dare be a mocker about such wise and perspicacious men who are so stingy that not one of them will treat himself to a haircut or a cream massage, let alone a bath.
I guess a religious person might find offense. They might, indeed, think that Socrates corrupts the youth. As their discussion continues, a mention of Pericles is made. Pericles has been dead for, I estimate, about a decade and a half. This is one of only 2 times that Aristophanes mentions Pericles. I wonder, what was his opinion of the man? Certainly, I imagine he could not have hoped to make much fun of him. That would be like making fun of Washington or Lincoln in present-day America. Either way, Strepsiades convinces his son to go to Socrates. The boy is introduced to goodness and badness. These two, as they are speaking characters, get into a debate or argument over who will take up the youth. To exemplify some of their debate, let me merely mention that at one point, goodness says to badness,
You're the cause of our teenagers shunning schools. Let me describe to you how a boy was educated in the days of my prime when I was promulgating what was right and common decency was the norm.
His argument is unquestionably conservative, though it makes one question if oneself is not conservative also. Take this little gem for example.
At the trainers, a boy had to sit with his legs crossed so as not to torment any viewer with lust, and when he stood up he had to smooth down the sand so as to erase the imprint of his young virility from the gaze of any gloaters. In those days no boy would anoint himself with oil below the navel, and his genitals were a marvel in their downy, dewy bloom, like ripe apricots.
I reckon these remarks would have made even a conservative laugh at themselves. Then on the other hand, in our time no such thing would even be a question for a variety of reasons. Goodness goes on to invoke the men that battled at Marathon, which would have been a glorified past for the audience. You may learn about it from Herodotus. Towards the end of his speech, Goodness says,
If you do this, let me tell you, and never let it slip your mind, you'll always win a glistening chest and glowing skin, broad shoulders, a small tongue, a mighty bottom and a tiny prick.
One imagines that associating goodness with tiny penises is a joke on conservatives. Badness makes exactly the opposing argument. Speaking of Peleus and Thetis, the parents of Achilles, he says,
He was too much of a gentleman and missed all the fun that a night under the sheets is. A woman enjoys being played with.
He continues this line of reasoning, speaking directly to Pheidippides by saying,
Make a list, my lad. Consider the onus on good behavior and all the pleasures that you lose with it: boys, women, cards, good food and drink, hilarity. Cut these out, and what's the point of living? Should you ever get caught prick-handed, simply blame Zeus and say, Look at him, the randy old thing. It's not at all odd, he couldn't handle temptation. How can you expect a mortal to be better than a god?
Long story made short, badness pressures goodness to admit defeat, and the latter leaves the stage. I should note that one is forced to wonder, given Greek religion, given the worship of a god as Dionysus, how could goodness, a social conservative, ever win this argument? It is funny to even wonder how this was all interpreted. Pheidippides goes into the think shop with badness, and ominously the chorus of clouds says to Strepsiades,
I'm sorry for you. You'll come to regret this.
There is a time lapse consumed by singing and dancing. When the acting resumes, Strepsiades greets Socrates and pays him a small coin for his services. I guess this is perhaps a clear low blow, as Socrates did not take any money. On the other hand, Socrates does not ask for it. Strepsiades insists that it is only proper to pay a teacher. So, perhaps Aristophanes is defending the so-called Sophists and covertly jeering at Socrates. I do not know. Upon re-encountering each other, the son explains to his father some of the history and logic behind the lending laws. There is a mention of Solon who, like the founders of the United States, made debt slavery illegal and proposed something similar to declaring bankruptcy. You may learn about Solon from Diogenes Laertius. Strepsiades praises himself for having such a bright and knowledgeable child. The first creditor arrives and Strepsiades refuses to repay him because swearing on Zeus is meaningless, given that Zeus is a hoax. The second creditor appears, and once again Strepsiades successfully argues that there is no sense in the concept of financial interest. He argues, by way of analogy, that the sea does not become fuller and larger even though rivers constantly flow into it. The chorus then briefly sings as they repeat their ominous prediction. When acting resumes, Strepsiades runs out of his house pursued by Pheidippides, who is wielding a baton. The father complains,
Savage. How could it be right to beat a father?
The son replies,
I'll show you how, and I'll justify it.
Their ensuing interchange explains that the father wanted the son to entertain the house guests. The son, in turn, refused to recite any old poetry. He only offers Euripides, who was at the time, and for his whole life, considered too modern or edgy. The father criticizes the youthful music, and the son proceeds to beat his father. On this channel you may also learn about Euripides' plays. The argument is made that while a father can beat his young child out of love, so too can a grown son beat an elder father out of care. Pheidippides makes several clever points, and Strepsiades is forced to consent that he is wrong. Afterwards, the son claims that his mother will get the next beating, and the father complains,
I blame you, clouds, that I'm in this mess, and after I trusted you with everything.
Not a bit of it. You yourself are the cause. You chose the tortuous path to shady ways.
Then why didn't you warn me from the start instead of leading me on, me, an old bucolic fart?
We do the same to everyone caught messing with a questionable design. And him we pitch into something bad until he learns some fear of God.
Yes, dear clouds, a hard lesson but not unfair. I shouldn't have tried to get out of paying what I owed.
In my opinion, this conclusion or revelation really undermines the claim that Aristophanes is to be blamed for Socrates' death. Even if he did portray Socrates uncharitably, in the end, the clouds, which are presented as Socrates' invention, are not bad. These in fact teach a lesson to the already misguided or corrupted. Then again, Strepsiades does say,
Yes, I suppose I must be mad, clean crazy to have swapped the gods for Socrates.
He goes to a statue of Hermes, the god of tricksters and liars, and apparently hears from it that he should not bother with a lawsuit. Rather, he should set fire to the think shop, Socrates' school. The students and Socrates run out. Unable to put out the fire, Strepsiades celebrates.
That pays for the brain wave of cheating the divine and peering into the arsehole of the moon. Round them, pound them, yes, and stone them. Let them have it, let them nab it, most of all because they've striven to unseat heaven.
Then the leader of the chorus, the clouds, says,
Let us the chorus, then, dance on our way. We did a fairly decent job today.
Again, the clouds, at least, are not bad. Note, no other work by Aristophanes has a clear or unitary moral message. Thus, this one also, perhaps, intends to mock both the conservative theist and the liberal atheist. As for Socrates' execution, I am inclined towards the belief that the philosopher probably praised and commended the enemy during wartime. Aristophanes makes a passing reference to Socrates in Birds that attests to this fact. Also, consider Plato's and Xenophon's political philosophy. They were his students. Lastly, the mere fact that many of the tyrants had been his students. Although it may be said that Socrates was unjustly executed by democracy, many more have been murdered by oligarchy and autocracy. Perhaps the truth is not that democracy is flawed, but rather, as Seneca has it, that the species itself is a doomed mutation. Now, to pique your curiosity, to motivate you to watch the last video of the series, I gift you a teaser sample of the many aphorisms I crafted as I read this author.
Trust in science is not the renounce of faith. On the contrary, it is to realize that when all else fails, whatever remains, despite how impersonal or unsatisfactory, it is nonetheless better than not having faith in anything.
If you enjoy or gain from my aphorisms, know that I have thousands. I will be writing books with short thematic essays composed out of aphorisms. These essays are profound and intriguing yet easy to read. For very cheap copies, look up Protagoras Pause in the Amazon website. I repeat, Protagoras Pause, that's my name.